your Son we pray. Amen. Okay, so, last week we looked at murder, and you can't say it wasn't relevant, considering. And this week we are looking at sexual sin, and you can't say it's not relevant. So Exodus 20, we're looking at one verse again. Actually, in the Hebrew, it's two words. It's pretty self-explanatory, but as we'll see, we'll need to do a little bit of that. Before we start, I wrote this down. This is the seventh commandment. There are 10 for those of you who are new to Western society. So that means after we get through 10, Lord willing, we'll be done with 10 commandments. It's going to take us like 13 weeks to get through 10 commandments. I apologize. But I think what we want to do next is, if there is a certain passage in the Bible you have read or familiar with or have been exposed to that is just a real riddle for you, I'd like to take a handful or so, and we'll explore them. But you got to give me more than the day of. So if you have any passages, like, I don't know, why did Elisha call down she-bears to maul a bunch of teenagers? Can you explain that to me? Well, that would be a fun one. Some of you are thinking, what did he just say? Well, maybe we have to talk about that one. But if there is a passage of Scripture, it could be just a weird story. It could be a verse that it seems like it's saying something that you're uncomfortable with or don't quite understand. I don't know. I think that'll be fun and good. Sometime in November, more likely November, I'm going to get with Jordan. On a Sunday night, we're going to try something I've been wanting to do for years. I just haven't had the courage to do it for various reasons. We want to do a Q&A night. Jordan is going to help me because I don't have all the answers. And so basically the way it works is between Jordan and I, we know everything. So if I don't have the answer, Jordan will have it, right? That's going to be my excuse. So if there is a specific question, I actually had Cheney send me a few things a week or so ago. We were talking about this. No, let's not do that. Danny would be good. Danny would be. I tease Danny, but he's pretty sharp. For a guy from Indiana, he's pretty sharp. And a Kentucky fan. Anyways, so be thinking about that stuff. If there's a passage you'd like for us to explore, it could be just your favorite passage. We'll do that. You want to do John 3:16 again? Fine, let's do John 3:16. I like it, the whole Bible. So I think that'd be fun. Spend a few weeks doing that. Got it. Okay, so Exodus 20, verse 14. Let's read it. You probably know it from memory, probably from the King James. You shall not commit adultery. You open up your Bible, and you find, well, I could have done that from memory. Good. Keep opening your Bible, but pretty straightforward. Again, two words in the Hebrew. I'm going to throw up this photo right here. June 22nd, 1963 was the seminal meeting between then-President John Fitzgerald Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. Of course, what they were talking about was the Civil Rights Act that would eventually be signed into law by Lyndon Baines Johnson. And they were also talking about King's plan for what is known as the March on Washington. Kennedy had finally come around to the civil rights movement, but he was not a fan of the March on Washington. He was afraid of security stuff. Of course, the March on Washington, many people, when they think of civil rights movement, probably think of that moment. It's the famous I Have a Dream speech from the Washington Monument. Anyways, or the Lincoln Memorial. Anyways, at this meeting was significant. You can see King there with some of the other civil rights leaders, along with Kennedy. I believe his brother was there, and others. And they want to talk about civil rights and where they could sort of come to some sort of agreement. But even though the two had met briefly before, this meeting started off a bit interestingly. Kennedy leaned into King's ear and he whispered, "I assume you know you're under very close surveillance." At which point he pulled back out and he wanted to read King's response. King did not know he was under FBI surveillance. In fact, King didn't really know what Kennedy was talking about. King was sort of stuck between, well, is he talking about I am under surveillance everywhere I go? Every conversation I have, every place I go, everything I eat, every person I meet. Is it that sort of surveillance, or is he saying something about the White House itself? He didn't know. And when Kennedy read King's mind, he was a bit uncomfortable. And we now know really what Kennedy meant. The FBI had been bugging King. all the hotels he stayed at and everything. And the reason is because they believed that King was a communist sympathizer. Now, I'm not going to chase that rabbit, though it is tempting. But through this bugging, of course, Hoover is still the head of FBI at the time. Through this bugging, they discovered King was very unfaithful to his wife. And I am keeping that as clean as I possibly can. King had a side to him that is not good. And I appreciate a lot that he did on the civil rights stuff. But the stuff he was doing in private was unacceptable. But, of course, the reason I bring this up is not to be critical of King, but to point out the hypocrisy of President John Kennedy making that point. Because here you have one of the worst womanizers in the White House, and that is a pretty high bar. Telling another womanizer, you shouldn't be sleeping around. Now, you may have noticed that these things did not come out until either man was dead. Why? Because everyone understood that if their unfaithfulness was ever made public, everything they stood for was ruined. So what Kennedy is telling King is you've got to knock it off, because you'll take not just your movement down, which I believe in, you're going to take my administration down with it. Now, with that said, is that still true today? No. We don't care about the behavior of our public leaders so long as they do what we want them to do. I can't get this out of my head as I'm studying You Shall Not Commit Adultery. We have gone as a country to where, even though we knew some of this, you could study the history of the presidents. Very many of them were unfaithful. Some of them might surprise you. FDR being a real famous one, which never came out. Of course, the public didn't really understand he was handicapped either, nor did they know that Kennedy was practically handicapped, severely sick. All of that was hush-hush. Now, it's all out in the open. In fact, we have video, we have audio, we have them bragging about their behavior in privates. And so what was once normal, that you do not commit adultery, has now what is normal is, well, it doesn't really matter. The ends justify the means. And what we find ourselves is similar to what the situation Israel is in. No other nation in the time of Moses would dare have it enshrined in their law, you shall not commit adultery. Understand how unique that is in the ancient Near Eastern world. Well, it's a simple command. We ought to think, okay, read it and we're done. Let's go home early. I don't think Kentucky plays today, thank goodness. So I guess we don't have to go home early. But watch, they probably do. I don't know, nor do I care. Let's start here with some assumptions, okay? Now, we read this and we already think, okay, the rule is don't commit adultery. There are certain assumptions embedded in the statement that we now have to bring out that you wouldn't have had to bring out in previous generations. The first assumption is the meaning of marriage. Technically, marriage is, or rather adultery is a term implying marriage. So if you have a couple who aren't married, we could use the word adultery, but we'll usually use other words when there's unfaithfulness. We could use the word unfaithful, use a word like cheating, something like that. But when we use the word adultery, we are assuming there marriage. But this also assumes marriage is a relationship between a man and a woman. Here you go, Genesis. Mother, hold fast to his wife. Notice hold fast. That is for the rest of your life. They shall become one flesh. We'll come back to that. Jesus reemphasizes this in Mark 10. A man shall leave his father and mother, hold fast to his wife, quoting Genesis 2. Two shall become one flesh. They are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. So you understand that in the commandment, do not commit adultery, it is with the understanding that marriage is between a man and a woman. Adultery, the connotation of adultery, also assumes sexual sin, and that there is a category of sexual sin. Now, adultery presumes marriage. Adultery presumes sexual activity that contradicts marital intimacy. And so what you'll find throughout all of history is that the category of adultery here is broadened to include more than just adultery. And that is a husband or a wife violating their marriage vows. Why? Because any sexual act outside of the marriage bed is itself a violation of the marriage. This is why premarital intimacy is a serious issue here. In fact, we know this biologically, that people who are promiscuous before marriage, maybe, and particularly if they have multiple partners, one of the things we have found at the chemical level of humans is that when you have two people intimate, they release certain chemicals that are bonding agents. Okay? And what happens whenever you have multiple partners is you're having to pull away the one fleshness, because now there's multiple partners. So you're not attached to the first partner. You can't be attached to the second if you're on the third, so on and so forth. So chemically, your body doesn't release those chemicals at the same level as it did with the first. And what happens, you finally settle down, what has happened? You've trained your body not to release those chemicals. Whereas if you save yourself from marriage, you have it to the max. Years ago, I had a young lady where I pastored before, and her first real boyfriend in high school just was head over heels. And I kept warning her, like, I don't like where this is going, where you are in particular. And so they slept together multiple times, and he broke up with her, and she was just devastated. I said, can I tell you what's going to happen now? You are going to find the first guy that winks at you, and you're going to end up sleeping with him. Now, you're going to tell yourself it's not going to happen. I'm going to tell you it's going to happen. I can already see it. You're showing all the signs and symptoms. This is what's going to happen. And what's happened is you bonded with this guy that broke up with you, and you want that bonding again, but you're going to find yourself in a cycle where it's going to be harder and harder to bond with someone. And that's exactly what happened. Proverbs 30, verse 20 is interesting. It says, this is the way of an adulteress. She eats and wipes her mouth and says, I have done no wrong. So this commandment assumes certain things about sexual sin. It is simply a lie that one can be promiscuous prior to settling down without any consequences. Here's the third thing that is worth mentioning. It is assumed here, and that is equality. The command does not condemn the sexual activity of only one gender while condoning it for another. Understand that this is unique. We're going to emphasize the uniqueness of this command, but this sets it apart from all other cultures. Let's take ancient Rome, for example. Wives, women in general, but wives in particular, were expected to be, we'll use the term chaste. You have to keep any sexual activity within the marriage. That was the expectation. That was not the expectation for men. Universally, it's not the expectation. In fact, you had prostitutes galore, particularly cultic prostitutes. We'll come back to that. And then there were slaves. You had complete access to slaves. Male, female, didn't matter. If you were a soldier and you conquer a village, you have complete access to ravage and I don't even know what term to use. And no one thought it was out of bounds. Women couldn't do that, but men can, because to the Romans it was about conquering, about being dominant, about being manly. This says, y'all, male or female, husband or wife, do not do this. And it puts everyone, regardless of gender or marital status or anything else, under the same commands. So if you want real equality, here it is. And it means that both partners can be guilty of this. Often we think of sexual sin and we limit it to a single gender. I'll tell you a quick story. We'll come back to Matthew 5 more than likely later. Jesus says, about lust. First time I preached that, I was at Goshen, and I started the sermon out saying, this is a text for the young and the old. This is a text for the male and the female. Okay? Because we assume lust is a young man's problem. And at the end of the sermon, this elderly lady came up to me and goes, Brother Kyle, I appreciate you doing that. Our young men really need to hear that. I just want to say, come on. You mean to tell me? Let's read the part about the speck in the eye. I'm guessing there's a plank in there somewhere, okay? Because this is a universal problem. Okay, well, that's the assumptions here. Let's look at the uniqueness. Where does it fit? I didn't look much into Egyptian practices. I really wanted to focus on Canaanite practice. That's where they're going. Most societies celebrate infidelity of multiple kinds. If you don't believe me, you should walk outside anywhere in the United States. This is a massive problem even now. Virtually every society is a sexually corrupt one. You will find pockets where that's not the case. It's usually connected to Judeo-Christianity. So the Jews are very strange in this sense. In the ancient Near Eastern world, particularly in the Canaanite world, later you get Babylon, Assyria, all these. You would have both male and female prostitutes virtually everywhere you went. Many of them were associated with cultic practices. Let me show you this from the Bible. Show you I'm not making this up. Genesis 38, when Judah, so this is the son of Jacob, this is the ancestor of David and Jesus. When Judah saw her, the harlot, he thought, his daughter-in-law, he thought she was a prostitute for she had covered her face. Later you discover he thinks she's a cultic prostitute. So in the ancient Near Eastern world, the fertility gods were often associated with sex. And the reason is because if the fields are to be fruitful, the womb is to be fruitful. They saw those two connect. If you read the Bible, it uses similar language. Be fruitful and multiply in the context of the garden. That's not an accident that the language is used there. So what you get then are temple prostitutes who, in order to enhance the crops and the wombs of your wife that you're cheating on, committing adultery against, you would have these temple prostitutes. So Judah sleeps with one. In Genesis 38, so he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Also the men of the place said, no cult prostitute has been here. Remember, this is his daughter-in-law. That's a whole nother story. Deuteronomy 23:18, you shall not bring the fee of a prostitute into the house of the Lord your God in payment for any vow, for both of these are an abomination to the Lord your God. Now, God had to put to his people, look, if you have a fee to a cultic prostitute, don't bring that to church and put it in the offering plate. Right? It's he had to mention that. Why? Because that's what you did. Why? Because that's what cultic prostitutes did. You bring the fee to the temple. We don't play that game here. One more, just to show you this is a universal problem in the ancient Near Eastern world. I will not punish your daughters when they play the harlot. I don't like that word. Nor the brides when they commit adultery. For the men go aside with cult prostitutes, and a people without understanding shall come to ruin. What is the context of Hosea? Hosea is married to such a harlot. And so we'll come back to this. Israel is herself a harlot. She's committed adultery. So men in particular were encouraged and welcome to violate marital vows. But added to this, men were allowed to engage in adulterous relationships with slaves. The Romans did the same thing. By the way, this happened a lot in America when slavery was here, and it's shameful. All of this is condemned in Scripture. The only relations acceptable are between a husband and a wife who are committed to each other. In fact, it's not just allowed, it is celebrated. It is encouraged. Man and woman, one flesh, regularly. Now, this is, of course, not only contrasted with the ancient world, this is contrasted with the modern world. I've been thinking this week. I'm a married man. I dated a pretty girl, married her and stuff. And one of the things you do when you're dating, you can get away with it when you've been married for a few years. But when you're dating, you can't do this. You have to watch a lot of love stories. You know this, right? As you're together a little longer, you can think, I support you in this. No, it's sort of like animations. Like when Evangel came around, I was so tired of Pixar movies, and I loved Pixar movies. Some of the best writing you'll have is the old Pixar, but eventually you're thinking, oh, I can't do more animation. Or Thomas the Tank Engine. It got to where VeggieTales was tough to watch. You just get burned out. I want you to think of your favorite love movie, romantic comedy, whatever it is. Now, be honest with me. Is the premise of the story, at the heart of the story, is it unfaithfulness? I bet it is. Let me give you a few examples. I'll start by looking at me, my favorite show of all time. It's The Office. The Office starts with a love triangle. These two are engaged to be married. This guy wants to be married to her. So you get this love triangle. And what you get here, and this is worth mentioning, is Pam is never unfaithful to Roy. Emotionally, she is. In fact, in second season, something like that, they have a romantic kiss after he leaves the office. It is Jim who pops in. He goes, I don't want you to get married. I'm in love with you. And he makes his move. At the end of the show, they're married. You know, Jim and Pam married. Everyone's, oh, it's just the greatest love couple of all time. She says, had Jim not made his move and kissed me, and it really offended me, we wouldn't be here together. I love The Office, but it's right there. Or let's consider, here's an oldie but a goodie. I've never seen it. You've Got Mail. I think one is married, the other's dating or living with someone. I don't know. I briefly Googled it, but I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm sorry.
No, he lost his wife, and he has a kid.
Okay.
No. Or is that Seattle?
See? Yeah. I think they're both guilty.
No, I think she's single because she owns a little bookstore and he owns the mega bookstore. That's the theory of that movie.
Well, that's obviously Forrest Gump's kid.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, let's talk about Forrest Gump. We talk about one of the worst characters ever is Janae. She is a monster. And I'll take that to the grave. Oh, I'm in love with him now because I have his baby. And anyways, I'm sorry. She just drags him along through a war. I mean, he fought. Anyways. All right. I've not seen this. Okay. Real life. Yeah, she needs to find Jesus. How about this one? Oh, I bet. Is it Rose? Is that her name? I bet she's glad he died off that boat.
There's room on that iceberg.
Oh, there's plenty of room on that thing, of course. But she wants him dead so that she doesn't have to be held accountable. That's my theory. Now, it's interesting. This is one of the greatest. I mean, in terms of popularity, for the longest time, it was the most popular movie of all time. Remember, this came out in middle school. I mean, every dude who had a girl had to watch this movie multiple times in theaters. This was a massive movie. What's the premise of it is she's not with the man her heart really wants.
I worked at a media store in high school when it was coming out on VHS, and you don't know what that is, Google it. DVD, you pre-ordered it.
Mm-hmm.
We took over hundreds of pre-orders.
That's crazy.
Had a Titanic party night when
Yeah.
it came to the store.
Yeah.
Everybody got their pre-order.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
This plays on the trope that you can be in a relationship with someone, even married. Although I know she's not married; she's engaged. But if your heart tells you someone else is the right one, you should ruin that relationship and chase your heart. Any of that sound familiar in our world today? I got one more up here. I've not seen this, but from what I tell, I think it's based on it's Notebook. So your ladies are like, oh no, busted. Chastity and I were like, okay, Chastity, what's your favorite love story? You know, we kind of went through some that I remember Matt and I watched, and we're like, dude, like all of it. Even when we're like, oh, that one doesn't have adultery in it. Scratch that. I looked up like the most popular love stories of all time. Adultery. I mean, it's like every single one of them.
I'll give you one that's my favorite that's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's an 80s movie, has Matthew Broderick in it. Rutger Hauer. Lady Hawk.
Lady Hawk.
No adultery.
No unfaithfulness.
True.
Well,
Matthew Broderick in there, you sure?
yeah,
Matthew Broderick.
well, no one's going to watch it now.
Matthew Broderick.
No infidelity in it. That's why I've never heard of it. Now, this is not to say anything of the common love triangle trope, which is another form of unfaithfulness. It's usually the girl between two guys, not always, but what she's going to go over here and string that other guy along just in case she changes her mind. She's going to go back over here, string that guy along. One of the things I like to do, because I got two girls in the house, is whenever there's a show or a movie, some with a love triangle, I like to tease them. Who do you think, a Billy needs to be with? I think it ought to be this sort of guy, all that sort of stuff. And they have opinions, I guarantee it. Lost is the one that we always joked with. Hebrews 13, marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage be kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all sexually immoral. It is worth noting the connection between adultery and sexual immorality. So this is a unique command. Much like last week we thought, well, don't murder. Well, that's pretty obvious. It's not. it wasn't then, it's not now. Let's look thirdly at enforcement. How is this enforced? Two ways. Let's get the a more controversial one out of the way, and that is it was enforced with execution. Moving on, let's talk about the next one. This may be surprising. The Bible includes, particularly Old Mosaic law, number of offenses deemed worthy of death. We can name some of them off the top of our head. Murder, necromancy is one. Rape, incest, kidnapping, particularly if you kidnap someone to enslave an Israelite. That was a criminal, a capital offense. But also adultery is listed here. Leviticus 20, the man that commits, I took this from the King James, commits adultery with another man's wife, even he that commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulterer shall surely be put to death. And notice the equality here, both are held accountable. This, of course, is demonstrated in the New Testament. I understand manuscript problems, but one of the more famous stories of Jesus, attributed to Jesus, is the woman caught in adultery. What is the premise? She is guilty of adultery. That is a capital offense. And what is Jesus' answer? I think I got the verse up here. He who is without sin cast the first stone. Which tells us that just because it could lead to execution doesn't mean that every case was. In fact, we have plenty of cases where it doesn't lead to execution. John 8 being the obvious example we just saw. But think of characters in the Bible who are guilty of adultery. We're going to look at one of them Sunday morning from Psalm 51. That's David. And we could look at David or Judah or Abraham. Remember, he is with Hagar. Solomon and his countless wives. And all the other dudes who have multiple wives. If you have more than one wife, you have committed adultery against your wife. And that is a sexual sin. It violates the sanctity of that marriage. And it's illegal now. Give it time. We're working on it. So the point here is to say that I think adultery has to do with marriage. This commandment has to do with protecting marriage as a bedrock of society we'll come to. But it is so serious that anything that threatens the sanctity of that marriage ought to be treated seriously. And so it is given, labeled a capital offense, even though we don't really see it carried out in the Bible. Here's the other enforcement of adultery, and that is divorce. I'll just read to you Jesus, Matthew 5. I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the grounds of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And so here you see that Jesus justifies divorce, doesn't demand it, but he will justify it for sexual immorality. Same thing in Matthew 19. Pharisees ask, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? The Pharisees would basically say yes. In fact, we have an account of Pharisees divorcing their wife because they burnt their dinner. So insert joke there. But Jesus comes and says, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. That you are bound to your spouse. So this is one of two explicit justifications for divorce in the Bible, the other being unbelief. But we're not able to track all that and chase that rabbit. I want to look at, finally, the application. Okay, so what do we do with this? Now that we have it, what are some things that we can say about this? One is a brief word about marriage. This command elevates marriage. It announces it as loud as possible that marriage must be protected against man's destructive tendencies. Jesus will say in Matthew 5 that you've heard it say you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you, any man who lusts after another woman has already committed adultery in his heart. And so what you have then is you have marriage, and the physical bond of marriage is held to such a high level, it must be protected. And when it's not protected, what you're going to get is chaos and messiness. And that is the culture which we're living in. We have justified all forms of sexual sin, and the damage that is done to us at the society level is just incalculable. Nothing tortures a marriage quicker than unfaithfulness. I think that is evident. The second is that this command says something about sexuality. This law defines what is appropriate and God-honoring as it relates to intimacy. Intimacy between spouses is good and God-glorifying. And in fact, the Bible goes out of its way to explore the good of intimacy in a marriage. So I want to give you a list. I don't think I have all the Bible verses on your screens. I don't want to spend forever on it. Big picture, what is the purpose of marital intimacy? Because Christians spend so much time saying, you shall not. We rarely speak of what thou shalt. And the Bible has a rather rich, develops richly marital intimacy. So let me give you just the purposes of marital intimacy. One, and I'll just put them up here because I don't spend forever on this. Reproduction is the obvious one. Genesis 1:28, God blessed them and said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Genesis 9:1, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. Psalm 127:3, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. So that's the obvious purpose. Another is oneness. Genesis 2:24, man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife. They shall become one flesh. Jesus, again, we looked at this earlier, repeats it in Matthew 19. He says, what God has joined together, let no man separate. So you understand that marriage then, and particularly intimacy in marriage, is a physical and spiritual bonding of a couple. It is oneness. And that is a unique relationship in this world, and it should be kept unique. Thirdly is knowledge. This is where you get Genesis 4:1. Adam knew his wife. She conceived and bore Cain. Cain knew his wife. She conceived and bore Enoch. Not Enoch related to Noah. Genesis 4:25. Adam knew his wife again. She bore a son, named him Seth. And there's other examples. I always thought that was a weird way of saying they were intimate and bore children. But I think it's a rather neat and insightful way of saying it. Remember that in the Garden of Eden was the forbidden fruit of knowledge. But now is the celebration of this kind of knowledge, the one flesh knowledge. And it is true that there is no one who knows you better than your spouse. And that is good. It is scary. One of the things you'll notice about younger generations is their anxieties are so high that relationships are difficult because it requires vulnerability. And we haven't really given them the space and the tools to handle vulnerability. That there is someone that you are so vulnerable with in marriage, they can be the greatest blessing and they can be the worst curse. That's the vulnerability. But when it is the blessing, there is nothing better than that relationship you have with your spouse. Fourthly is protection. This is 1 Corinthians 7. Now concerning the matters which you wrote, it is good for a man to not have sexual relations with a woman, but because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, each woman her own husband. Notice that both have temptations here. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, likewise the wife to her husband. Notice, it is I owe my spouse, not my spouse owes me. And this is certainly true when it comes to intimacy. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body. The wife does. Notice equality here, a right kind of equality. Verse 5, do not deprive one another. Notice, don't deprive from one another, except perhaps agreement in limited time. Devote yourselves to prayer, then come together, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. It's a protective measure of it. We need each other. Fifthly, comfort. We went through this in Genesis when Sarah dies. Isaac, her son, has a really hard time with it. And he had just married Rebekah. We read this in Genesis 24:67. Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother, and took Rebekah. She became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. It's interesting there, isn't it? How is Isaac comforted? By sitting down talking about his feelings? No. The arms of a woman he loves. I think that's worth thinking about. That is something worth thinking about. We don't ever apply it that way. But it's okay. My soul's been ripped apart by grief, but God has put someone in my life to comfort me in this moment. I think it's something worth thinking about. Finally, pleasure is sort of the obvious one. You have to save it for last because this is where our culture only wants this one. Proverbs 5:18, let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Be intoxicated always in her love. Song of Solomon, chapter 5. There's some debate over this. Who is speaking? In Song of Solomon, the groom speaks, the bride speaks, and the bride's friends speaks. I like to remind young men this all the time. Ladies, you only have to win one person for marriage, and that's the dude you marry. We men, we have to win you and all your circle of friends and family. We have to win them all. You know, and so what's funny about that is in Song of Solomon, there's the groom. He has no friends practically. You know, she doesn't have to win them over. He has to win her friends over because they're always piping in. But there is this voice in chapter 5, verse 1, and it's debated who is speaking here. And the answer I like, because I think it preaches well, is God is speaking. He speaks one time in the Bible, or not in the Bible, Song of Solomon, and it says this: "Eat, friends, drink and be drunk with love." It's one of the more intimate passages in Song of Solomon. Chapter 5, chapter 7 are the two. So this is clear in Scripture. So there's clear application here, and so we have to address the lust of our heart and what it says about intimacy. Thirdly is society. The Decalogue functions as a basic moral and legal framework for Israel as it becomes a nation. So when they leave slavery, they're not a nation. They're an ethnic group. But when they come to Sinai is the first major step. They become a people. They become a nation. And so they have a law. They have their customs. But once they enter the land, then they will get the land. And central to that is this command regarding adultery. And I think it's obvious why. For a nation to exist, survive, and thrive, it must have a clear identity and social practices. Ancient Israel was both an ethnic and religious nation. Thus, they had to identify themselves with certain practices and ancestry. This means, given that this command is among the chief of the commands for the nation of Israel, how a nation understands marriage and sexuality in its society shapes the health and survival of that society. This is central to it, much like murder is a central idea. Worship is a central idea. All of these are central. So next week we'll see a society cannot function if all we're doing is stealing from one another. Yeah, the Vikings were cool for a while, and that didn't work out too long. That there has to be an understanding. Because what is adultery? It is the stealing of another man's spouse or another person's spouse. And is the murder of a marriage, if you want to use that as an illustration. And this is where Christianity splits from where the West is right now. We do not see sexual acts and choices as having anything to do with who we are as a nation and its survival, and we could not be more wrong in that regard. What we are seeing is precisely that. Since the release of, say, the birth control pill, the age of first marriages in America is getting later, and the size of families are getting smaller. Now, I've mentioned this before. We are at the precipice of a declining population. So you boomers, maybe you Xers, enjoy your Social Security. It won't be there for me. It won't be there. When Social Security started, I think you had, like 10 workers for every retiree? Now it's 2. And this graduating class, 2025, will be the largest graduating high school class in the history of America if things don't turn around. Next year will be smaller. The year after that will be smaller. The year after that, smaller. You cannot have a robust economy with a declining population. In fact, you already know this, don't you? Pick any industry. They are all short on labor. Every single one of them. You name it. Teachers, preachers, plumbers, electricians, lawyers even, doctors. Does it seem harder to get in to see your doctor than it was?
On a decline in social influencers and YouTubers.
Right, yeah. There's,
They would all go out and get real jobs. They would be fine.
So what you have is a brand new industry. That's the creation of wealth. That's great. But what you had before was, in order to add industries, there needed to be the need for growth. And so while we're growing in these industries, AI, technology, social influence, you're not able to sustain these other things. So yeah, everyone wants to be a YouTube influencer or whatever, but we're short on plumbers. Now, what you've seen, especially since COVID, is the salaries of these positions going up because you don't have any other choice. By the way, we saw the same thing after the Black Plague. You want to know where the middle class comes from? Black Plague. Because what you had was serfs and the people at the top, so you had the rich and the poor, and the rich protected and fed the poor, yes. But there were so many people, half of Europe's population died, that now labor was so hard to find that you had to pay them more. You remember during COVID, like Wendy's would pay like $20 to flip burgers. Like, where was this 6 months before, you know? If you were already working at Wendy's, you're like, I want a raise. You know, I'm already here. Why? Well, that's to be expected. So enjoy your restaurants because they are going to struggle more finding labor. And this is with depopulation. All the while, we are promoting all kinds of things. So what does adultery have to do with health of society? We got to move. One, it affects trust. If we cannot trust those in whom we are most intimate with, who can we trust in a society? The children of divorced parents, statistically speaking, struggle with the issue of trust. Why did daddy love his other family more than us? Will my future spouse treat me the same? What about my friends, co-workers, roommates? What about my God? Will they be as unfaithful to me as my family were? Morality. This affects morality. Immoral societies destroy themselves from the inside. The primary source of one's values comes from the home, not school, sports, or society. If adultery is normalized, and with it will come other sexual sins, then other acts of immorality will be normalized as well. Violence, deceit, etc. Just look at the Ten Commandments. This also affects the well-being of a society. Every institution depends on the security that marriage brings. The problem we are having in every school system is the breakdown of the home. Why don't people want to drive school buses anymore? Is it because they don't know how? Don't want to put up with kids. We know that. You're not allowed to say it. So scratch that out, if you will, for me, Don. But we know it's true. We know it's true. Why is there a shortage of substitute teachers, even though pay is increased? I substitute taught. Yeah.
It's because of the Board of Education.
Right, yeah, there's systematic institutional stuff. Yeah, but so what we've asked schools to do, and we've asked coaches to do this, is to take the place of mom and dad. And schools are inadequate to do that thing. Coaches can't do it. I remember hearing years ago, the Calipari Patino years, that they're taking in these guys without a dad, and they're like a father. Like, that's not what dad is. Dads do more than teach you how to dribble a ball. And it's not a coach's job. Coach's job is to win games, or they're fired. But we've had to ask other institutions to step in because the home has fallen apart, and therefore our society has fallen apart. So if we get this wrong, society will collapse. Here's the last thing I just want to say as it regards here, and that is worship. What you're getting at here affects worship. It's not surprising. Remember what we said. The first commandment defines the rest. Right worship leads to right living. And in the Bible, adultery is connected with idolatry. So what happens in the ruining of a marriage is what happens in the unfaithfulness of worship. Let me give you just a few examples here. Jeremiah 3:8, she saw that for all the adulteries of that faithless one, Israel. Notice who's the faithless one? Israel. Israel is an adulteress here. Remember that Israel is pictured as a bride, much like the church is in the New Testament. I had sent her away in a decree of divorce, yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but she too went and played the harlot. So what's God saying here is, these are my people. I know they're split and stuff, but both have committed spiritual adultery, idolatry. Jeremiah 5:7, how can I pardon you? Your children have forsaken me and have sworn by those who are no gods. When I fed them to the full, they committed adultery and trooped to the houses of harlots. This is the English Standard Version, by the way. What is God saying is I was the perfect husband for you, and you still went after. By the way, that is plural, gods. They went after multiple lovers. Ezekiel 23:37, for they have committed adultery, and blood is on their hands. With their idols they have committed adultery, and they've even offered up to them for food to the children whom they had born to me. Notice here the connection between sexual deviancy and the assault on children. The application, I think, is clear. if the purpose of intimacy is exclusively pleasure, children will suffer because children stand in the way. And this is where we're at. Hosea 3:1. And the Lord said to me, go again, love a woman who is loved by another man and is adulterous, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love cakes of raisins. It's what you would offer Baal, I believe, the cakes of raisins. So that's very clear there. Gomer, the wife of Hosea, is a harlot. And so Gomer and Israel are parallels here. And so Hosea and God are the parallels. And so even though Gomer repeatedly goes back and goes back into harlotry, Hosea is to keep pursuing her. That is the extent of God's love for Israel. He will keep pursuing her. In fact, it's after chapter 3, I believe, or maybe in chapter 3. Gomer has gone so far, she's now a slave. She may be a cultic slave. And so in order for Hosea to get his wife back, he has to basically sell everything he has and buy his wife back. And that's when he says, look, I got nothing left. You have to be faithful this time. I can't get you back. But in the story, what we were to see is the lengths God will go for his people. And he pays not with coins, but he pays with the cross. And that's the good news of the gospel. Though we are guilty of adultery, the Lord pursues us nonetheless. I came across this proverb, and so I'll just put it at the end. I think it's a good summary of this. Well, I'll just put it up here. Proverbs 6:32, he who commits adultery lacks sense. Now, actually, before we look at the rest of it, just pause there. Just pause there. It's true, isn't it? In fact, you can apply that to virtually every sin. We read the Bible almost exclusively as right versus wrong. And there's truth to that. It has a lot of morality. But don't underestimate, the Bible is also about what is wise and foolish. And what is wrong is foolish. What is wise is right. Now, they're not the same, but they are related. So what you have here is a moral category of adultery connected with a category of foolishness. He who commits adultery is a fool. He's senseless. But notice why it is senseless. He destroys himself. He destroys himself. One of the lies of adultery in particular is I can get away with it and it won't harm my relationships. We can keep it secret. That is virtually impossible now. You may remember over a decade now, someone hacked into a website. It was I can't think of the website. It was, yes, that sounds right. It was to facilitate adulterous relationships. Yeah. And someone leaked all of the names, users on it. And there were some prominent evangelicals on there. There's just a lot of prominent names in general. Now, one of the things we found out about it is you have to Google it if you dare, the far majority, I think it was around 80% or more of the users were men. But it was so demanded that there's all these women waiting for these relationships for you, but they weren't. Because that's actually not how women fall into adultery. Yeah. So that was exposed. And I remember one evangelical leader, some of y'all will know who it is. If you want to know, I'll tell you afterwards. It came out. His name's right there, and he confessed to it. He said, I was in a hotel traveling, and I was by myself, and I got really lonely. And all I wanted to know is that I could. And you can't help but think, that is a man who's destroyed himself. He's destroyed his marriage. He's destroyed his ministry. He who commits adultery lacks sense.
After that list came out, and after I was divorced my second husband, I looked to see, because I knew both my husbands were unfaithful, but my second husband was on that list.
Yeah. And look at the damage it does. This is the lie, and we'll talk about this more Sunday morning with David. I didn't plan this, do adultery and then do David's confession, Psalm 51. But, God has a way of doing things. But David learns, I didn't just hurt me. I've ruined everything around me. Bathsheba, Uriah, and his own wife have been affected because he lacked sense. In that moment of weakness, the story of Bathsheba and David is written like the Garden of Eden. David saw what was forbidden. It's the same language of was pleasing to the eyes, and he took. What's interesting in the story of David is he doesn't just take for himself, he orders his servants to get involved in it. So now he has other people involved in his wickedness. So it's quite the story. Okay, Danny and them are traveling, so I can't pick on him. Anything else that we miss?
Hamilton was a good.
Hamilton's another one. Yeah, of adultery. Yeah. And he came out and had to confess it. You know, his enemies were ready to destroy him. That is a rare example of that time where something salacious of that nature was leaked by his political enemies. I mean, it is striking, isn't it, that those who didn't like Martin Luther King Jr. or Jack Kennedy, FDR, and others, they knew about the other relationships. They didn't leak them. Well, that is not going to happen now, particularly since at least Clinton. So.
Forgot the Troy.
Yeah, that was one. I listened to a thing about the Iliad this week, and I thought, well, there's another story. Why did the war happen? You know, it was because of adultery. And what's the premise is we take the side of Troy, and because they're the ones attacked. You know, the Iliad, Paris, the prince, goes and steals the wife of the Greek king, and he gets all mad, and so Agamemnon. And actually, how is the story of the Iliad, Trojan War, described? Is that Helena, is that her name? She was so beautiful, 1,000 ships, you know, were set sail, whatever it is. You're like, how many people died because of that relationship? That's a problem. That's a problem. Like, we should be ashamed of that. Now, I like the Trojan War, you know, in terms of myth and all that. I love the Odyssey, it's one of my favorite stories, but that's another great example. Yeah. All right, it's a little late. You're tired of hearing my voice. How about we get out of here? Lane, do you